it's fairly clear that Indo-Pacific Command, which is in many ways the most important of the American commands from an Australian perspective, has been revising its doctrine in response to the Chinese threat to Taiwan and indeed in the South China Sea. And as it revises its doctrine, it's clear that drones are going to play a much larger role in American war preparedness than they did before. Just a couple of months ago, Admiral Sam Praparo, the new commander of Indo-Pacific Command, said that in the event of a Chinese blockade of Taiwan, his job would be to turn the Taiwan Strait into, quote, a hellscape. And he meant by that he would be using unmanned sea weaponry to destabilize China's military and naval maneuvers. So there's change in the air, John. I think you're right to say that Australia and the UK, the other parts of AUKUS, are pretty much asleep at the wheel. But the United States is not. And even although the Biden-Harris administration has set us on a path where defense spending will gradually get squeezed over the coming years, that is definitely not the mood in Silicon Valley. And I think, depending on the outcome of the election, there is a decent chance that we'll see a rapid modernization and an improvement of America's deterrent in the next 4 years.
A couple of questions out of that then. It becomes critically important that we don't let the Chinese win the AI race. And that technological cutting-edge capacity that America's known for, can it stay in front?
Well, it's in front now. The Chinese really have struggled to keep pace with the large language model revolution. They're doing pretty well. I don't want to give the impression that it's all over. It's probably about as close as the US election, in fact. But the Chinese are laboring under some important handicaps, including the restrictions imposed by the US Commerce Department that limit their access to the most sophisticated GPUs, the most sophisticated microprocessors or semiconductors that come out of Taiwan, come out of TSMC. I think the AI race is crucial. So is the quantum race, which is the other big technological frontier that's relevant here. And my sense is that the US has an edge, not in terms of raw numbers of PhDs. The Chinese throw PhDs at their research and development on a massive scale. But in terms of quality, the US is still ahead. There are only a few areas where I think that's not true. I'd be quite concerned, for example, about robotics, where China seems to be forging ahead. But in AI, it looks to me as if the United States has a lead, and it's not obvious to me how China can really catch up as long as it can't make its own GPUs.
And the second part of that, the question that arises out of what you said a moment ago, hardware, and that's requires big bucks and real expenditure. America is very stretched financially. I can't believe the lack of fiscal discipline. It's extraordinary. Have they got the hardware? I mean, China has more ships, but America has greater tonnage. It's only part of the answer. It's technological capability. I mean, have they got that cutting edge? Can they do what might be necessary in the Taiwan Straits?
This is a really key question, and it's quite a complex one. First of all, the fiscal side. Yes, the United States federal government has been spending like the proverbial drunken sailor. To have a deficit of about 7% of GDP at full employment is indefensible. And the Biden administration has been very fiscally irresponsible. It's driven the debt up above 100% of GDP. More troublingly, it's set the US on a path that is even less sustainable than it was 4 years ago, and it wasn't particularly good then. In fact, pretty much since the turn of the century, successive administrations have failed in their duty to stabilize fiscal policy. That matters because although the world seems to have an insatiable appetite for dollars and 10-year Treasury bonds, the cost of servicing an ever larger stock of debt, even with interest rates coming down, is still very high over time. The Congressional Budget Office tries to project this. As far as I can see, we're already spending more on interest payments on the federal debt than on defense. That's this year, for the first time.
That's pretty frightening.
And that delta, the gap between debt service and defense, is going to be roughly double by the time we get to the, say, 2040 That's a really unsustainable path. I came up with the idea of Ferguson's law to try to crystallize this. That Ferguson's law states that when a great power is spending more on interest payments on its debt than on defense, it won't be great for much longer. And it's true right the way through history. You go all the way back to the Dutch Republic, the Spanish Empire of the Habsburgs, the Bourbons of 18th century France. You look at the Turks in the 19th century, Britain in the 20th. It's always the case that once the debt reaches a certain point, you start not having the resources to maintain your empire's military capabilities.